People in this country don't talk about death. If when I would talk about it sometimes with people, they would go, oh, be optimistic. You know, don't talk that way, you're gonna be fine. And you really need to look at it. And this is the perfect way to do it.
Intense colors and geometric shapes, shimmering and glowing, and the sense of being totally in the colors. Not only just seeing the colors, but being in the colors. I said, oh, this is different. Yes, this is totally different.
8 hours. It was very intense. It was a very intense session. That's why I said, even if you do have an expectation going into a study like this of something that you will get from it, you're bound to get so much more in ways that you probably can't even imagine now sitting here. That the benefit will be even beyond what you can even think of, quite frankly.
In 1943, chemist Albert Hofmann was developing medicines to aid blood circulation using lysergic acid derivatives. His research would lead to the discovery of LSD and the isolation of other psychoactive compounds, including psilocybin. These breakthroughs showed great promise for use in therapy and were commonly prescribed by psychiatrists. However, the medicines would later be caught in the dragnet of 60s drug prohibition. In 1968, domestic scientific research into the use of these unique psychoactive compounds would be dealt a harsh blow. The U.S. Congress established a classification system that would define certain drugs as Schedule I, or having no medicinal value and high addiction potential. LSD, psilocybin, and other medicinal compounds were unfairly grouped in this category despite evidence that they were non-addictive and part of legitimate psychotherapy research.
There was a decade there of very exciting, promising research. Then funding dried up, and the research became more and more controversial, mainly because of the abuse or misuse of the drugs, and it became kind of a political football. We were in a state-funded facility, and there were more and more problems to deal with in the effort to just do good science. And so the staff got smaller and smaller until it was me and 2 secretaries, and then it became 2 secretaries.
There was so much anxiety about the impact psychedelics might have on culture, on young people in the late 1960s, early 70s, that this really wasn't a well-thought-through process. It was a knee-jerk reaction, fear-based reaction to just make these drugs as restrictive and unavailable as possible. It was a very challenging context at that time for researchers to continue the exciting work they were doing. These compounds were deemed of no value for no medical value and with a high likelihood of abuse. So they were essentially put in the deep freeze for many years.
In the 1990s, the freeze began to thaw as the National Institute on Drug Abuse and the FDA approved new research with psychedelics. With more modern methods of analysis and sophisticated technology available, scientists had the tools necessary to make great strides in the study of these substances' effects on the brain. But funding was not available at a corporate or governmental level. The Hefter Research Institute was formed to consolidate and support ongoing research despite the lack of adequate funding.
The Hefter was founded in 1993. Dave Nichols was the president and the one who brought a group of researchers together. The Hefter Institute really is devoted to helping to facilitate the development of protocols of psychedelics within academic medical institutions.
With psilocybin, it's in the public domain. A pharmaceutical company cannot get a patent on psilocybin, so there's not a lot of incentive for them to invest in it or make money on it. So currently, the research with psilocybin has to be funded by private individuals. The Hefter Institute wants to make psilocybin a prescription medicine that can help human beings that are going through considerable anxiety and angst regarding their death. I had a serious life-threatening cancer myself about 15 years ago, so I'm well aware of the trauma of facing one's demise. I was given about 3 months to live. I had to go through chemotherapy, so I understand the great importance of the work that the Hefter Research Institute is doing with cancer patients to mitigate their suffering.
At Harbor UCLA, Dr. Charles Grobe directed a research team studying psilocybin as a treatment for the profound mental suffering associated with advanced stage cancer.
Psilocybin facilitates a greater likelihood of achieving a psychospiritual state of consciousness, a mystical or mystico-mimetic experience. And the old research literature from the 50s and 60s very strongly indicated that individuals in psychedelic research studies who experienced a spiritual epiphany during the course of their many-hour treatment session were more likely to have a long-term therapeutic outcome.
Once you have an illness diagnosed that's terminal, it really changes your viewpoint. I had lost my faith because of anxiety, and I was just terrified. I was so anxious that it was hard to think about anything else. I didn't think I was so worried about death, but I was worried about the process of dying, about suffering and being in pain and having all kinds of horrible medical procedures. So I became horribly, horribly anxious. And also, I was very irritable. I was being irritable with my husband, Richard. And that was a very bad thing, because he's my caretaker, you know, when I'm ill, and I was not being nice to him and treating him the way I should.
We tried to live life as normal, but she was irritable and we were both stressed out. I'm not saying it was her fault. The dynamic of the interaction between us often led to quarreling.
We talked about my intention, and my intention was to learn to control my anxiety so I could enjoy the rest of my life, because I was not enjoying my life at all.
At NYU, a similar study is being conducted to explore the therapeutic impact of psychotherapy combined with administering psilocybin.
The first part of the study is the effects of psilocybin on psychosocial distress in advanced cancer.
Because our research is working with people who are having cancer and living with cancer, we needed to learn not just how to be psychedelic psychotherapists for someone going through an experience with psilocybin, but also how to do palliative care treatment. And only one person in our study, Tony Bossis, has experience in palliative care.
Palliative care is a growing discipline, an important discipline that's emerging robustly in the past 10 years or longer, addressing people's needs at the end of life. Palliative care is not hospice care. That's defined as 6 months or less, but palliative care can be activated at the time of diagnosis of a life-threatening disease. And this study that we're involved with really aims at that piece, the existential suffering, the psychospiritual distress people go through when facing advanced disease and potential death.
I'm 49 years old. I have systemic anal cancer. This is a very rare form of cancer. and it usually strikes about 5,000 people a year, and usually women. I hadn't been ill before in my life. In fact, I had probably been one of the healthiest out of 5 boys. And it was just kind of a little ironic that I would end up with cancer.
One of the greatest sources of distress at the end of life is the psychological and spiritual and existential despair people go through, and the lack of meaning. And that the search for meaning, and if meaning is cultivated in some way, that people die a better death.
What the subjects are looking for is a transformation of the experience of facing death and having a terminal illness or having a cancer diagnosis. They hope, and what we suggest to them might happen, is an improvement in their tolerance for pain, an improvement in their ability to think about these really terrifying, deep existential questions of meaning, loss, despair, hope, regret, guilt, transcendence, life after death. These topics that are so difficult to talk about and that are often avoided or medicalized and seen as pain problems, physical pain problems needing additional medication, as opposed to these most profound questions of life and death and existence itself, which need not to be medicated, but to be understood and talked about, and for someone to be able to tolerate the level of intensity of engagement that asking those questions, really requires.
I'm a very independent person. I did come to a time in my life where I realized I was going to need so much more. And I actively started seeking out therapy probably in my mid-30s. That was the type of emotional support that I felt worked for me the best. One thing that terminally ill patients realize at some point, may not be 6 months down the road, it may not be initially, but you finally at some point realize you don't have time on your hands. And I'm not saying anything against the psychotherapist that I had, because he was absolutely great, but 2 years ago I wasn't gonna die. So I needed to get on the fast track, that I needed more than just what I was getting in terms of therapy.
While the NYU and UCLA studies focus on psilocybin's effects on patients with life-threatening illnesses, Johns Hopkins University explores its potential as part of a therapeutic regimen with healthy individuals.
I'm considered the, quote, clinical director. Right now, my expertise is in how to safely prepare people and guide them through experiences with entheogens.
I was really interested in some of the research that was beginning with psilocybin and the whole question of how to help people awaken or in some way significantly grow in a very short period of time.
I was working on a project with some colleagues, a community-based project, and one of my colleagues came to the meeting, and she told us about the ad she saw in the city paper in Baltimore. And she said she was going to sign up for the study. And one of the requirements was that they were looking for people who had not taken any of the hallucinogens in the 60s. And here was a group of women, we were almost all 50, and none of us had taken the hallucinogens.
We would never give a entheogen or psychedelic drug to anyone that we hadn't established a rather deep sense of rapport with first, because there has to be a sense of interpersonal trust and respect established for the drug to be safe.
When I got into it, and Bill Richards gave me the book, Cleansing the Doors of Perception, and I took it home and read it, that's when it got serious. I thought, I'm going to do what?
These are what's called phase 1 studies that you have some interesting idea or you have a hypothesis that this may be helpful. And with these agents, phase 1 trials really are about determining safety, feasibility. And the UCLA study, they've treated 12 subjects, and they were able to show that it was safe.
The next phase of research study would be a phase 2, which would be a limited examination of identified patients who've been recruited as subjects fitting inclusion-exclusion criteria and being rigorously studied both from a physiological perspective as well as, in the case of these kinds of compounds, from a psychological perspective.
And a phase 3 study is usually at multiple sites. It includes usually hundreds of patients. And if a phase 3 study has a sufficient, efficacy effect, then you could go to FDA and petition to make it available as a medicine for a particular indication. In this case, it would be for psychosocial distress associated with advanced or terminal cancer. So, one study doesn't do anything. Charlie's study, even though there's some preliminary positive findings, that's not enough to have a drug be approved. You really have to move it through the drug development process. You need lots of money to do these studies. And at the end of it, you need to show that it's safe and effective.
In addition to the psychological studies, research at the Imperial College in London examines the physical effects of psilocybin on the brain. The work is supported by Amanda Fielding and the Beckley Foundation.
These psychoactive substances are wonderful tools, and you can learn a great deal, which we know so little about the brain. We need every tool that we can apply. And because they're illegal, no one has been applying them for 40 years, and that's a travesty. It could prove to be a new way of treating depression, which would be an interesting breakthrough.
So the current psilocybin study is designed to understand what psilocybin does in the brain and where it does it. We put people in an MRI scanner and we look at the activity of their brain before and after or on psilocybin. And at the same time, we also get ratings of how they feel, how they perceive the experience, perceptual changes, mood changes, other sorts of insights that they might have into their behavior. And we're also beginning to ask questions about the way in which they can retrieve memories and the kind of memories they retrieve when they're under the influence. And then the plan is to correlate the changes in brain function with the subjective changes.
In terms of whether these agents cause hallucinations, they're a little bit misclassified. Hallucination is experiencing some sensory phenomena based on a stimuli that doesn't exist in reality. It's internally generated. Versus an illusion would be looking at the wall, and the wall is melting. That would be an illusion, and these drugs tend to cause more illusions than frank hallucinations. They alter how we perceive real stimuli.
All of the classical psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, the thing they have in common is they activate serotonin 2A receptors. So all mammalian species have serotonin 2 receptors in their brain. In this part of the brain, in the prefrontal cortex, there is a high density or high expression level of serotonin 2A receptors.
In fact, it's one of the most ancient neurotransmitters that exists. So if you look evolutionarily, it came into being likely before dopamine and many other neurotransmitters did. Psilocybin acts very selectively at serotonin 2A receptors, so that's the lock and key. So psilocybin can click in to this receptor site and activate a variety of processes.
If you're using a drug like psilocybin to change the way people deal with something unpleasant happening to them, like depression, like terminal illness, it raises the question of what the drug actually does. Does the drug produce some kind of temporary veneer, some sort of overwriting, putting a curtain across the experience for a while? Or does it actually produce something more profound than that? Does it actually change the way in which you as an individual deal with the trauma? There's a central part of the cortex, the higher part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, which coordinates mood. That's the key orchestrator of negative mood and depression. And what we found was that psilocybin turns that off. And this is remarkable because psilocybin does in 30 seconds what antidepressants take 3 to 4 weeks to do.
This is, in many ways, a psychotherapy plus drug study. It's not you come in, you get the drug does whatever, and then you're on your way and you're fine. It really, the experience has to be embedded in a kind of psychotherapeutic matrix or milieu. So each subject is assigned a therapy dyad, a man and a woman, and they do a lot of preparatory psychotherapy. We sort of go back to the very beginning. We get their life story and talk about major significant events in their lives, relationships, accomplishments, disappointments, life before cancer diagnosis. And we try to cull from that in the therapy, what were difficult things that you encountered, and how did you get through them, and what kinds of things helped?
Part of the goal of the preparatory sessions is for the therapists to get to know the patient and to come to understand what his or her own unique existential issues are around dying. Some people have enormous guilt about what they did or didn't do with their children or with their spouse. Others have profound regret. Some people are very angry. Some people are terrified. Some people have a great deal of trouble reaching out and trusting others. Others, that comes very naturally, and having to go into this alone is what's hard for them.
One of the things that they do in the initial week is they do a timeline, or what they call a lifeline. I knew I had relationships with my mother and my father that I was not going to be able to reconcile. I'd been struggling with that for a very, very long time. And there were still demons that I was dealing with. I wanted to die unburdened of anger and angst, and I've never asked myself, why me, about this cancer. I never have. It's kind of like the philosophy I've had about life. Things will get bad. There's light, there's dark. Sometimes we just don't know how good it really could be. And there have been times in my life that I have reached that point where I found out how good it could be. And if that meant that I had cancer and I needed to learn some things from cancer, to die with a peaceful heart and to die unburdened, then I was willing to go that extra mile to do a study in New York when I probably shouldn't have been traveling. I'm that sick. It was tough for me. That's really what got me involved in the study itself.
If the person is open to letting go of their habitual, conditioned way of thinking and perceiving, even for a short period of time, what can be occasioned is a sense of being more than that.
We found what's most valuable is developing an intent to trust one's own mind, one's own psyche, a willingness to receive whatever comes.
I did have one intent for the third session. I said, if I'm going to go through all of this and have a mystical experience, I want to see the divine. Now, Bill joked with me about that, but I was very clear. I remember saying to him, I said, look, I'm not doing all this and not getting, this is my only chance.
So, Robert, this, of course, is our session room. And before a volunteer gets in, we set the room up for them. Before the onset of the drug is usually between 20 and 60 minutes. So we often look through an art book or a nature book to get your mind out of your intelligence and thinking.
I can remember really experiencing those art books. It's really getting into the depth of the landscapes. There were lots of landscapes in there.
There's an area of the brain called the locus ceruleus, which acts as a novelty detector that gets inhibited and also gets somewhat activated with these drugs. So people who are on these agents do have the sense of looking at something and seeing something novel or interesting or beautiful they wouldn't normally notice.
So you could imagine as something that normally would seem not very novel, under the influence of a psychedelic would appear to be even more novel. So maybe we would see flowers in a way that they look novel again, like see them through the eyes of a child.
And we would say to you now, as we put on the eye shades and headphones, we just want you to let yourself go to experience whatever comes up.
My first experience of the drug taking hold, I was lying on this hospital bed, and it felt like the bed had turned into a circle of hands that were holding me up. As soon as it started working, I knew I had nothing to be afraid of.
We're here, but we have no expectations. If you want us to be here right with you, just let us know. We will be here, or sitting back. And I am gonna hold your hand. Because oftentimes when you're just, and I would have taken your watch off because we want to let go of all time, space. And so we often start with just putting a hold on you, just to let you know that we're here.
It was very gentle, and there were people right there if I got upset. I certainly felt that if anything scary happened, I wasn't alone. But with my eyes covered, I saw patterns and visions and sort of faces. I thought about being involved with the people I love, and everything looked absolutely beautiful.
It was like you're at the top of a roller coaster and you're about to go down. And I remember kind of inside myself saying, whoa, I'm taking my mind with me. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm taking my mind with me. It is not leaving me, it is staying. I like my mind, it is coming with me. My thoughts and my mind are going with me. And I felt okay, and off I went.
It's very difficult to explain what went on during the dosings. There were some really great experiences that I had with visuals that were just unbelievable. They had handpicked about 12 hours of music that they've used in several different studies.
Everyone by default, puts headphones on and gets music. And the music is really there to sort of support the experience, to drive the experience, to embed the experience.
There was a Turkish tune that was playing, and I did see these whirling dervishes, which as the song progressed, I saw them twirling faster. And I got much more into a deeper trance. The faster their spinning state, the closer that they feel to God, or closer that they feel to, the pinnacle of whatever, love.
The music is it's a powerful factor. And so we really have to standardize it. It's not like you can bring in your own music, and if you change that variable, you suddenly have a variable that's not constant. And luckily, one of our therapists, her husband, was an ethnomusicologist. So we happened to have an expert. And then we would figure out, well, where would it go? Would it be in the beginning part when they walk into the room? Is this part of the peak? Is this the sort of plateau or post-peak period? So we figured out, where in terms of the pharmacologic and experiential parts of the drug, it would fit.
They put on Ave Maria, and that made me cry about what effect my death is going to have on my granddaughter. And they all came over and they just sort of put their hands on top of my hands.
Sometimes as you're beginning to feel the effect and go further and deeper, it helps to have connection here. Throughout the session, there's different times if it seems like you're going through something, or if you want to share, or if a piece is over, just different times we check in. So we'll often then just put our hands on your shoulder and just say, Robert, is there anything you'd like to share?
I had to get up and go to the bathroom, and when I was washing my hands, I looked in the mirror. I used to have very long curly hair, and people thought I was so much younger than I was, and now I look my age. at least. So I went back into the room and talked to them about that, and it was very helpful. I sort of came to the conclusion that, well, yes, I look older, but with age comes wisdom and maturity, and I felt okay with it.
I re-experienced my father's death. I was transported back to that time, and I just grieved my father's death, which I don't think I really did at the time. I was just a sobbing mess during this session, sobbing. And I experienced it as waterfalls. My body, I was a waterfall. It was just flowing. It was like my heart cracked. My heart cracked open.
They're never left alone. There are two guides with them, giving them the space they need, but always present.
Bill and Mary had prepared me in the event that I would see anything really frightening, like a monster. And I told him, I don't do monsters. I don't do monsters. He goes, well, we never know, but we have to tell you that you may experience something frightening.
The biggest potential danger of these drugs is an adverse psychological event, whether it's a late-term bad trip or paranoia. The last thing we want to do is have people that are anxious, that have a terminal illness, and induce more anxiety. So it is key that we go over with them the potential negative things that could happen, and to rehearse ahead of time. What happens if you have some fearful experience? You're having an image of something that's fearful or scary. What do you do?
In the dosing session, I noticed that they had these death masks, and I could see them. I could see the fire, and I could see the masks kind of moving around in the fire. Under normal circumstances, I think anybody would have been frightened.
Bill Richards helped train us, and his big thing when that happens is go towards the fearful thing. Search for the fearful thing, say hello to it, make friends with it, go through it, and there can be something therapeutic about dealing with something that's scary, confronting it, being with it, and realizing it may be not so scary as one imagined, and then sort of being able to kind of pass through that.
So what I noticed was the masks were not designed to scare you. They were actually designed to scare the fear out of you. Although everybody's experience is different, what I feel is the same for many people is it actually may take them out of feeling, paralyzed, filled with fear.
This prefrontal cortex is the executive part of the brain where we make our decisions about what happens and really where we integrate, in a sense, our perception of what reality is, if you will. So we think of the cortex in the brain as being set up for survival of the species. The cortex is always perceiving things are going on around because you're looking for predators or you're looking for things that might be threatening your survival. So when you take a psychedelic, all that sort of the filtering function is degraded, and now you're processing all kinds of things that are coming in from things. Instead of sensory like touch and feel and hearing, etc., you're starting to pick up things that normally you wouldn't attend to, subconscious things, emotions, feelings, ideas, and so forth.
There was a piece of music where my mind was almost creating like a musical video, and it was of these figures, all kinds of people coming together, just about kissing. Almost kissing, but not quite. All kinds of ages, all kinds of, and it was a very sensual experience. And I didn't even want that to stop. I remember, Bill wanted me to, take off the blindfolds. I go, no, I'm not finished with this yet. And I told him what it was. And I said, it was like, I'm being shown this amazing symphony video. He says, that's within you. You're not being shown anything. That's within you. I go, no, not that. He goes, yes, that's within you. I said, all that passion and sensuality? He goes, yeah. I go, oh.
The cortex is in an activated state. It's processing more than it normally would. It really is kind of a mind-expanded state. But the information you're giving it is not the normal sensory information. It's this other information that's coming maybe from subconscious realms or whatever.
And if you look at those descriptions, you can usually find what I call the 6 basic categories of this core religious experience, which is unity, transcendence of time and space, noetic, intuitive knowledge, a sense of sacredness, awesomeness, deeply felt positive mood, joy, peace, love, and ineffability, and also what we call paradoxicality, that it's very hard to put it into words. You say, well, I died, but I've never been so alive. The God was one, but he contained everything that is.
We do know that these agents induce spiritual states. These are meaning-making drugs in terms of the experience. So they produce spiritual kinds of states, and it's key to know whether someone's spiritual or religious to begin with.
There are many ways throughout history that people could have peak or mystical experiences. This is a very reliable way to use a chemical agent or a sacred plant or chemical. But it's about the experience, not the drug. It's about this experience and the opportunity to have this experience to then explore where they're at in their life, and for that to have transformative effects and to mitigate the anxiety they have. Some patients will come to the study with prior spiritual traditions and beliefs, and some don't. It's not a prerequisite. This study can be discussed in a secular way or in a spiritual way. It can be defined as a mystical experience, but it can be discussed as in purely scientific ways. It's a medication that brings about a state of consciousness where one feels unity and transcendence and interconnectedness. So it can be discussed both ways.
There was a parade going down the street, and I was in the audience, in the crowd, watching a jester coming down the street, and he was just a delightful person. But on one side of him was all dark and shadowy and sad and miserable, and the other side was all light and bright and happy and fun and cheerful. And he was just walking down the street, and I thought, well, that's pretty cool. That's what life is. It's the dark side and the light side, and we kind of walk this path, between the two. And right in that height of the giddiness, the parade was transformed to the image of Jesus walking down the path, dragging the cross. And right when he got close to me, his face just turned up and said, forgive them, Lord. They know not what they do. The suffering we inflict on people, the suffering that's been inflicted on us by people who are just plain ignorant, they know not what they do. And I think that piece has probably done the most to have me stay connected and be with people and not judge.
The psyche is incredibly wise. And what happens in a session is often infinitely better designed, if you will, than anything you could have planned in advance.
When we were about 3/4 of the way through, I was asking myself, what is this? Who have I been talking to? Who's been showing me this? And I started asking out loud. I said, who are you? And nothing came except my breath. I could hear, sense my breath. My breath and the wind. My breath and the breath of God. That's it. That's it. My breath and the wind and the breath of God, they're all one. That's it. I was asking, who are you? Bill's voice came in and said, would you like to see? Inside of me, I said, I'm going to see the face of God. He said, well, open your eyes. And I thought I was going to open my eyes and look directly into his face. And I opened my eyes, and he had put my husband's face right in front of me. I gasped, I screamed, and I jumped and headed under the covers. I was in shock. And I remember just like heavy breathing, thinking, John? You know? And I don't know how long I was under there, under the covers, literally under the covers. And I told Bill, I said, I just have to be with this. Because it went so deep and such a shock.
That it really shakes you to the very ground of your being and can be incredibly humbling, but also enlightening.
I kept going deeper and deeper and deeper into that experience, almost like reviewing everything I knew about John. And I got to a place, I go, oh yeah, there it is. There it is. It's in him too. It's in him too. The issue that always comes up whenever I began any kind of one of these transformative experiences was my husband. Because one of my long-standing complaints was about, you know, all the typical complaints, you know, women have about men. How dumb he is, how insensitive he is. To have that experience where, you know, in him is that core of divinity. Experiencing John as the divine, that was probably a shift in how I experienced him.
So then basically at the end of the day, you'll talk with, you've talked with your guides throughout, but then we'll just kind of check in a little bit and relax and then see how you're doing. And then you have a set of questionnaires to do. And you may feel very emotional throughout the evening because of things that have happened and can continue to, just rise up. And that's very normal, nothing to be concerned about. And we give you our card. You're welcome to call us anytime. And then we send you home with your rose and ask you to write a report. You do always come in the next day because we want to be meeting with you and see how you're doing. And the reason we ask you to write a report is not just for us, but really for you to capture what happened in your day before you talk about it with us.
I felt that all I'd ever wanted to do ever was to be of service. And I experienced that. And it was the most delightful experience I probably have ever had. It wasn't during the session, it was in one of the integration sessions afterward. And I said, Bill, how do I stay in this? This is marvelous what I'm experiencing right now. How do I stay like this? And he told me, he said, you do whatever it takes for you to stay like this. If it means going swimming every day like you like to do, go swimming every day. If it means doing jewelry, making art, do that. Do whatever it takes for you to stay in this place.
In a very practical, kind of measurable way, often patients will report an improvement in their relationship with family and friends, an improvement in their ability to tolerate pain, a greater efficacy of the pain medication that they take, a decreased need for tranquilizer medication in order to feel calm, an improved sense of initiative and motivation to do things. Many people feel like, I've only got 3 months to live, why bother? Like everything's over. And that you see transformed into, I have 3 months, I have every day, I have every minute. And each day and each minute are precious and can be filled with meaning and hope and love and connection.
We have had more than a couple volunteers say that that session was better than my 10 or 20 years of therapy. That's why we want to be researching it, because it just seems like there can be so much
therapeutic and spiritual value to this.
This experience has cemented my beliefs about being part of a bigger picture. My God, I mean, I'm going to be in a great, wonderful place when I die. You know, great, wonderful place.
Sort of like the point of realization that we're infinitely more than we think we are. And if we've had that experience, then the future changes. Our understanding of the past can change, and life itself.
You have a new understanding of what you are, that there is something sacred, there is something profoundly meaningful about you.
Some of these things sound really profound, and they are, but they're much deeper than that. They're much more profound than that, because putting words to them almost like cheapens the experience a bit. You know, I didn't know what to expect, and boy, did I get a lot of really great things out of it, although it took a lot of hard work, believe me.
I'm much more focused on this moment right now. And it's a good way to see your life from an objective point of view. You can sort of back up and see your whole life, when it started to right now.
When we came back, it was like someone had put on a light bulb inside of Annie's head. She was literally glowing.
I felt wonderful. I mean, I think it's an incredibly useful tool. What we did, it probably would have taken me years of therapy. I think it's a sin that you can't just go to a clinic and do it.
This is very much the beginning. And right now, the studies are all privately funded. Not a single person gets paid. Well, in many ways, it's a labor of love. Eventually, if this psilocybin were ever to have an effect and be brought to market, you know, there would have to be governmental or pharmaceutical funding. Private funding probably couldn't sustain. It takes a lot of money to do that.
To us, it's the compassion and action to do what we can to get this medicine moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 so that people that are suffering can use it.
The hope is that a younger generation of researchers and investigators will come behind us who will pick up the torch and continue to move forward.
I want to have a research program where I can compare what psilocybin does, what ayahuasca does, what LSD does, what MDMA does, what amphetamine does. I want to be able to have that public domain. People can see what the different drugs do in different brains. I want to know if it does the same thing in illness, in depression, anxiety. But the real thing I want to do is I want to understand the molecular mechanisms which differentiate the psilocybin effect from, say, the Prozac effect. And I want to find drugs which can do the good things of psilocybin without the risks of any kind of negative impact. Then you could have a revolution in treatment of depression.
These substances are to psychiatry and the study of religious experience as the microscope is to biology or the telescope is to astronomy. It's an incredibly valuable tool if it's wisely and responsibly used. And the realms waiting to be explored within the human mind are every bit as vast as the cells or the cosmos.
I'm pleased to let everyone know that my mom was at peace in every sense of the word when she passed. It was amazing and inspiring to see her face the last unknown and glide through it like it was no big thing.
I'm very strongly in favor of them becoming legal, and not to just use wherever people want to, but by prescription, in a clinical medical setting. I think it's incredibly helpful. It's more helpful than any other treatment I've ever had.
As much as painful as cancer is, and as tough as it is to get through a normal day, I still am a very fortunate person and continue to learn every single day from this experience. And I believe this study has helped open me up to learn more and accept more, as opposed to wondering what or how the cancer was going to affect me tomorrow, where it was going to pop up tomorrow. I feel I can die now with peace in my heart.